BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. The first is that for the Anything Goes Friday this week, I will be doing a Q&A session about the Son of Sam murders, about David Berkowitz, as well as some theories that were discussed in the book The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry. And please feel free to drop your questions about the Son of Sam and Maury Terry in the comments section down below, and perhaps they will be worked into a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. And if you're listening to this episode in the distant future, you can always weigh in on these subjects, and maybe there will be a new Anything Goes Friday segment. Now, as far as Black Box Online Radio is going, we are closer and closer to the first ever members-only podcast. There is now a membership that is available at BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88 allows you to make a donation or a contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And with the membership, there's going to be a members-only podcast that will most likely come out perhaps once a month, maybe every 2 weeks, because, as I said in a previous episode, I thought that bi-weekly podcasts are a little bit easier to follow in terms of keeping all of the discussion topics straight for people in the audience. I mean, the only monthly podcast that I followed in the past was Crime After Crime, which was hosted by John Lorden and Danielle Hallen, and I found by the start of the next episode it was a little bit difficult to remember all of the details of the previously discussed true crime episodes. But in terms of this channel, I will also be releasing a new edition of the book Killer on a White Horse in the near future, which is going to contain a sequel story, and in the far, far, far down the road times, I'm going to be hopefully releasing Down the Dark Lane, my second book, in audio version on YouTube for free. Now, to talk about today's material, there have been several publications, as well as films that have been made about Jack the Ripper. The Ripper mystery is perhaps the world's most famous unsolved murder mystery. In 1888, someone or a group of people committed a crime spree in London, in England, and whoever was responsible for that has never been identified. Some people insist that there were multiple killers, other people insist that there was a single killer, or some people think that there are perhaps some misconceptions that people have about the entirety of the story. Now, the first book that was written about the Ripper case was actually somewhat of a very directly for-profit publication that was done in possibly poor taste, and it's called The Curse Upon Mitre Square by J.F. Brewer. And if you go to my episode on the suspect, Dr. Alexander Pedichenko, I discuss that book. And one more time, the title of it is Jack the Ripper, Suspect, Dr. Alexander Pedichenko, because there was this cane that was discovered about 7 or 8 months ago in the archives, and they believed that it was a composite sketch of Jack the Ripper that had been carved into the cane, but other people state that it's not actually any Ripper suspect. It was the Mad Monk character from the book The Curse Upon Mitre Square, whose name is actually Monk Martin. And if you read The Curse Upon Mitre Square, only the third part of it is about Jack the Ripper. There are 2 other parts that are unrelated, and it's talking about stuff from hundreds of years before the Ripper case. But Mitre Square becomes important because the Ripper's 4th victim, Catherine Eddowes, was murdered in that location. And after I read that book, I found that the first film that had been made about Jack the Ripper was Alfred Hitchcock's The Lodger, which came out in 1927. And it was not Alfred Hitchcock's first film, it was actually his third. I mean, I didn't know that information off the top of my head. I confess I Googled it. And I would like to be discussing that film with you guys right here. Now, if you have not seen the movie, The Lodger, I invite you to keep listening, because I always want these discussions to be available to people who have watched the content or not, or who have read the book or not. Please stay tuned, because let's talk about some elements that were created for this film, which was actually based on a novel that came out about 14 or 15 years prior to the filming of the movie. The Lodger is a silent film that is available on YouTube for free, and I love silent movies, and I'll share some things about them later on in the episode. But they have this fictionalized version of Jack the Ripper called the Avenger. That's the name that he is referred to as. And there's this serial killer that's going around and murdering people. But a big difference between the Avenger in the film The Lodger and the real-life Jack the Ripper is the killer leaves a particular signature with a triangular shape. And he's being very, very clear and direct that he is responsible for committing these crimes. And it actually looked like one of the images for BlackBoxOnlineRadio that you guys have been watching going by over the years. But in terms of similarities and differences, the real Jack the Ripper did not do things like that, and that is why people have such a hard time connecting all of the crimes together. The first Ripper crime occurred on October 31st of 1888 with the murder of Polly Nichols, and on September 8th with the murder of Annie Chapman, then the double event that occurred on September 30th with the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, 2 victims killed in one night, and then ultimately the murder of Mary Kelly, the most vicious crime, on November 9th of 1888. So, with this type of very disconnected set of homicides, people weren't completely sure if it was one person or multiple killers. And a big example of this is the murder of Liz Stride that took place on September 30th, as previously stated, because her body was not mutilated, and it could possibly be that there was one killer who just committed the murder and was not able to do the mutilations, but instead he just had to run away and find a different victim. But I would like to go back to this concept of a signature, because what appears to be happening with the homicides that took place in 1888 is there is some type of deranged element that is driving this person to commit the crimes. And there is a very strong contrast in the film The Lodger, because what the authorities are trying to do is they're trying to map out the activities of the Avenger, the serial killer that's very similar to Jack the Ripper, and they have this hot zone of his criminal activities, and they think that he's only going to commit crimes in a particular zone, maybe within a certain radius that has significance to him, or that there's just some type of geographic connection in this very small area where the serial killer is operating. Challenge question for you guys. Do you believe that Jack the Ripper operated in that way? And some people will say yes, and other people will say no. For example, some people believe that the Ripper crimes were committed by the previously stated Dr. Alexander Petachenko, who was working for, I'm tempted to say the Russians, let's just say that the Russian Empire at the time, and he was smuggled out of Russia by the secret police, and then he went to Petrograd, which was called St. Petersburg at the time, St. Petersburg, and he committed another murder there. That story is heavily, heavily challenged, and some people think that it's just pure fiction, but that would be an example of someone who is not committing crimes on his home turf. In contrast, we would also have the story of Charles Lechmere, the man who discovered the body of Polly Nichols, the first witness to find the body of the Ripper's first victim, and the second was Robert Paul. And I was having a conversation with somebody about Jack the Ripper offline, which is something that I don't do too frequently, and they put forward the points that all of the crimes happen in a very close proximity to locations that Charles Lechmere would have been familiar with for the entirety of his life, growing up in certain areas, living near certain areas, and with the murder of Polly Nichols most famously, his walking path to work. So some people believe that there is just a hot zone of activity that has significance to the killer, and other people think that there might be a more direct and calculated reason as to why these crimes were chosen. And then there are people who just think that the Ripper murders were done out of pure convenience. Think about everything that I said in relation to the double event, the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, that somebody wanted to murder Liz Stride and also mutilate her body and disembowel her. Now, her throat was slashed, but they wanted to commit some very vicious mutilations to her body, but they were unable to do so, so they just simply walked away, and they tried their best to find another victim, and that person was successful in doing so within about 20 minutes. I mean, some people estimate it was only 15 minutes from the time that the Ripper left the murder scene and then was able to start talking to Catherine Eddowes. Now, that doesn't mean that he committed the murder within 15 minutes, but they say a quarter of an hour later he met up with Catherine Eddowes. That to me shows that it could be there's this little element of convenience, that these are the times when this person has the opportunity to commit the homicides. Just these are the women that are in vulnerable places. These are the women that are available for the Ripper, as horrible and gruesome as that sounds. But in terms of this concept of the Avenger, I immediately thought of a different crime, and I of course thought of the Black Dahlia Avenger, the murder of Elizabeth Short in 1947, and on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, I've done several psychological breakdown episodes in what I used to call the Versus series, when I would look at two criminal events. Sometimes they weren't even serial killers, and doing comparing and contrasting. How did these people think, and what were the motivating factors for this person to commit the crimes? And I do this a lot on Zodiac Monday. So in this episode of the Jack the Ripper Report, I would like to talk about the differences and similarities between Jack the Ripper and the Black Dahlia Avenger. Now, immediately a similarity is both of these names come from self-appointed, self-appropriated titles that were created from letters that were mailed in. Yes, even the Black Dahlia has letters that were mailed in. Now, of course, is it from the killer? Always open to debate. Even with the Ripper letters, it's open to debate about which ones are authentic or not. But that's how we get the term Black Dahlia Avenger. And immediately, when I was watching this film, The Lodger, I was thinking, now, did somebody see this film in 1927? And it always stayed with them, and they wanted to leave behind these calling cards pretending to be a killer, because we explore this even in the Zodiac Killer mystery. The idea that somebody did not have their own original ideas, so their plan was to just rip things off from movies and books and comics and magazines and stories, not really using some very original ideas, and that's why the name The Avenger was chosen. But I do not have any direct source that would state that that's why the name Black Dahlia Avenger was chosen, because of the 1927 film The Lodger by Alfred Hitchcock. But I would like to provide some introductory material on the Black Dahlia that is coming to us from the website Haunted MTL, and this is a post that was written by Rachel Roth, and it discusses Steve Hodel and his book Black Dahlia Avenger, but the introductory parts are extremely insulting to Steve Hodel, and I've said some critical things about him and his comments about his Black Dahlia Avenger suspect, George Hodel, as well as the Zodiac Killer connection to it. But, I mean, the introductory paragraphs are just straight up trash talk, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to go straight to the parts of the substance material, saying, on January 15th of 1947, Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia, was found in a vacant lot, savagely mutilated, severed at the waist and completely drained of blood. There were cuts on her thighs and breasts, and her face had been slashed from ear to ear, creating what has been called the Glasgow smile. The cause of death was determined to have been hemorrhaging and shock from blows to the head and face. It was a one-time event with no murder like it to come before or after, and most of the leads went cold. Now, I think it's really odd that the person is going to say this, that it's the one-time event, when it's talking about Steve Hodel's book, Black Dahlia Avenger, which openly states that his suspect, George Hodel, his father, went on to commit other very similar murders that sometimes involved surgery and sometimes did not. But I digress from that because it is somewhat true that, of course, the Black Dahlia Avenger would be specifically referring to Elizabeth Short, as she has been called the Black Dahlia by the media. Immediately, we have something that is very different with the Ripper murders in 1888. No matter which ones you think were committed by the same person or not, we have very directly have some type of serial murder taking place, serial homicides, and there is this almost secretive element of the Ripper, because I'm going to be flat out and honest with you. I don't believe that the Ripper wrote the Dear Boss letter, the first letter that gives Jack the Ripper his name. I don't believe that the Ripper wrote the Saucy Jackie postcard, which gives us the name for the double event. I don't think that those communications were written by the killer. I think they were hoaxes or forgeries written by the publication The London Star, which is actually just called The Star, but London Star is a little bit easy for us to differentiate. So what we see is that there is some type of deranged mania that is associated with the murders and the mutilations, whereas with the Black Dahlia case, it appears that there was a very specific and calculated reason as to why Elizabeth Short was murdered, and I don't see the elements of calculation in the Jack the Ripper case. It appears that, as I said, women were targeted, and they were targeted out of convenience. Like, this person wants to have access to women, and I'm not even completely convinced that all of the women were specifically targeted. And I talked about this in the episode that I did on Sir William Gull and the Masons, as well as a little bit in the episode about Walter Sickert. I have a suspect playlist about the Jack the Ripper suspects, and I invite you to hit the like button, subscribe, visit some of the other Jack the Ripper episodes before I started doing the Jack the Ripper report. But those talk about more of a calculated reason. There's a reason why Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman and Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes and Mary Kelly were targeted. Somebody knew who they were, and they wanted these people eliminated. And, okay, I can comprehend it in a logical sequence, but I do not see the hard evidence that any of that actually took place. Alright, so what is going on with the Black Dahlia case? Well, Steve Odell has also talked about this in a lot of his presentations and episodes, and that is that Elizabeth Short was not only cut up in the face with the quote-unquote Glasgow smile, instead she was also bisected through the second and third lumbar vertebrae with someone who had a very strong awareness of medical knowledge. Now, with the crimes that were committed by the Ripper, medical knowledge is not a prerequisite, and that is something that I didn't think that I would be agreeing with before I started doing this Jack the Ripper report, because I thought that I was going to flat out say that, nope, the Ripper had to have been a doctor, because, I mean, women are mutilated and a kidney is cut out, and I just don't think that that is completely true now. There definitely is not some type of twisted surgical procedure going on, because I have to go agree with someone who was a supporter of the Ripper hoax theory, and that's just some... I don't have your comment in front of me, or else I'd give you a shout out, but what they said was that people don't commit surgery in dark alleys where it's near total darkness and you can't even see your hand in front of your face, because there wouldn't even have been street lamps in some of the crimes. So that just goes to show that there might have been some type of different anatomical knowledge. The Ripper could have been a butcher, the Ripper could have been a fishmonger, maybe working in a cigar factory, and those are the suspects that I've been discussing most recently. But right now, I would like to go to a comment that was left by Ruined Roast, and that is that, I don't know if you've already addressed this in a video, but one thing that bothers me about Jack the Ripper is the removal of organs. What is the motive? It is something that is not usually addressed and dismissed as the killer taking a trophy, but why take an organ as a trophy? And that relates to the murder of Catherine Eddowes, where her kidney was taken. And then after the murder of Catherine Eddowes, there's the From Hell letter, which contained half of a kidney that was preserved in some type of alcoholic solution. Now, this stuff has never been evaluated by 21st century science, because the original From Hell letter and the kidney do not exist anymore. They have been destroyed. Now, the first question is, why take an organ as a trophy? There could be a couple possibilities for this, and this is purely a challenge question that has been presented to me, so I'm going to try my best to answer it. I'm not using a magical crystal ball or anything. Number one, it could be that the person was again, had some type of profession where they were familiar with organs and they just grabbed hold of it because it had some type of meaning to them. Or, as Patricia Cornwell pointed out, that the Ripper would have been on top of Catherine Eddowes, stabbing her with downward motions, and then just stuck his hand down and grabbed a hold of something without even directly trying to steal the kidney. Or just, it could have been done in a way where the Ripper was on top of her, stabs her, and just grabs hold of the kidney, and so on. But also, there's a follow-up question that says, how would they preserve the organ? As I said, it was in some type of alcoholic solution if it would have been preserved and mailed in with the From Hell letter, or what if the From Hell letter is not authentic and the kidney was discarded shortly after? I'm starting to consider the motive that cannibalism and the claims from the From Hell letter, which I consider to be the only most probable communication sent by the killer, and that could be evidence for it. Now, the From Hell letter contained half the kidney, and in that text the killer talks about, or the letter writer talks about, how it was from the victim, and it was cut in half, and half of the kidney was cooked and eaten, and the other half was mailed in as a taunt to George Lusk. Okay, all of that could be completely true. I also completely agree with Ruined Roast, as well as numerous other people, who state that if there's any letter that is authentic, it would be the From Hell letter, because it turns out that you gotta look at this. Imagine if the journalist Frederick Best was fabricating letters, pretending to be the serial killer, the Ripper, and then writes the Dear Boss letter, writes the Saucy Jackie postcard, and then the real killer's thinking, hey, this person's writing letters pretending to be me. Well, I'm going to write a letter because I am me, that has, filled with terrible mistakes and spelling and done in a sloppier way, because that's the way that the deranged mind of the Ripper worked. And he wanted to prove that he was the killer by mailing in half of a kidney. Now, of course, he wouldn't have had to use an organ for that, and I think that's the nature of this challenge question. Why would he do that? It could very simply be that the Ripper was experiencing some type of schizophrenic episode, some type of psychotic episode, or even in some other theories that he was just very high on drugs and he didn't even know what he was doing. That, he wasn't even completely aware of all of his functions. Yes, he knows that he's going out to commit murder, and I'm not talking about something to the point of not guilty by mental disease or defect, but that perhaps experiencing some type of blackout in terms of being overwhelmed with adrenaline and not focusing too clearly on his actions, and that's why the kidney was stolen. As previously stated, downward stabbing motions and grabbing a hold of it. But I think that it's a very good challenge question, and that's my honest attempt to answer it. But do you see the differences between the Black Dahlia case and the Ripper case? The Black Dahlia case shows a stronger methodical approach. Absolutely. The Black Dahlia case shows that there was so much more thought put into the crimes, and I highly doubt that the murderer of Elizabeth Short was undergoing some type of psychotic episode or schizophrenic episode or anything of the sort. I think that there was a very specific reason why Elizabeth Short was murdered, and to the credit of Steve Hodel, I do think that his father, George Hill Hodel, is a very strong suspect in the Black Dahlia case. I do not believe that he is a strong suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery, but I did particularly like the angle that there was a woman who was murdered in the Philippines in 1967 named Lucilla Lulu, and that George Hodel was living in the Philippines at the time, and 500 meters from the murder site where Lucilla Lulu was murdered, there was a street sign that said Zodiac, and that's somewhat relatively close by. Lucilla Lulu went on to become the first Chop Chop lady. I don't like that name, but that's what she is called. And women who were dismembered in the Philippines and very, very gruesome murders, and they might even be a little bit blend of calculation plus some more of the mental instability issues that I've talked about with Jack the Ripper. But I would like to do some follow-up notes, though, about some of the films that have been made available about the Ripper, as well as just talking to you guys about cinema in general. Firstly, I invite you to watch the film The Lodger, and it is a silent film, but I love silent movies, and I remember back in the day just watching Phantom of the Opera and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then just thinking, like Lon Chaney's very, very entertaining performer, and his self-applied makeup will stay in your mind until your last day on Earth and just rests in your memory. But one of the best films that I've ever watched was one from Harold Lloyd in 1927, I think, the same year as The Lodger, I think, and it has two titles. It's called The Freshman. You might be able to find it under the name College, but College is also some type of crappy film with Drake Bell that I never bothered to watch, so I think of it as The Freshman. It just had so much heart and soul and an honest, fun-loving story, and you think about this stuff like, wow, some of the best movies were even made in the silent era, and you watch Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, and they are just very, very entertaining performers. But in terms of Jack the Ripper, I've also responded to the 1959 Jack the Ripper film, which again was surprisingly entertaining, and they all have different elements to the story. They all have different aspects, and they share a theory as to how the crimes could have been committed and how people would have been investigating them. Whereas I think something like the 2007 Zodiac Killer film from David Fincher was more just sticking to a lot of the facts as well as looking at a very conventional approach to the subject, but perhaps that was to David Fincher's credit because a lot of people just fell in love with that, and it creates a new pathway, a new set of highways that can be explored for the Zodiac Killer mystery, whereas a lot of these Jack the Ripper movies appear to be telling the story in their own way and providing a theory or possibility in their own way. And I think that we should have all of it. I mean, why would limit ourselves only to one thing? Yes, you can just present the facts of the case in a film, and to the credit of the Fincher film from 2007 about the Zodiac Killer, it's a meta-narrative. It's a story of how the 1986 book Zodiac was written, and it focuses on the writer Robert Graysmith, whereas some of these Jack the Ripper movies that I've talked about are trying to show a possibility as to how the Ripper crimes could have been committed, or a fictionalized version of Jack the Ripper. In both of the movies that I've talked about on this channel and over the last couple weeks, that's exactly what it is. It's not necessarily the real killer, it's a fictionalized variant of them. One of them is even called the Avenger. But I would like to give a shout out to Restless Dreams, who sends something into the comments section on last week's Jack the Ripper report, and that is, "Hi Ned, hope you're doing well. I was thinking if you need a good content idea for your channel, you can schedule a weekly Zodiac Hunters Night, or just pick a name. For instance, you can go live and people can call in and talk about their own suspects and theories, and how they got interested in the case and other suspects. I think it would be a good idea to talk to other people directly and hear the voice and their reason rather than reading from the comments section." The irony is I just read your material from the comments section. Two things about that. I think that first, the easiest thing to do would be the live stream where I could respond to people's questions and comments, but I completely understand what Restless Dreams is saying about responding to people live on the air, and they actually get to call in. The problem is, though, people are definitely going to call in bad faith and going to start trolling, so there would have to be some way to screen the calls, and also there could be more scheduled guests. And I do Zodiac Monday talking about the Zodiac Killer, but now we are on Ripper Wednesday talking about Jack the Ripper. Why not also have a Ripper Hunters night, so to speak, and you guys can share what you think about Jack the Ripper, as well as including all of these things, the stories that have been connected to the case, The Curse Upon Mitre Square, The Lodger, and I'm going to go through some of the other films about Jack the Ripper, because, I was also quite surprised that more films have been made about Jack the Ripper than some of the other serial killers out there, or other crime events out there, and I think it's because they want to do this in a way where a lot of the general public's conception of Jack the Ripper has not been fully shared or examined, and also the persona of Jack the Ripper is still very mysterious because mostly they're just 3 letters that people think that could be directly from the killer. A lot of the other letters are viewed as inauthentic or they are not confirmed communications, and I tend to agree with that. I think it's highly unlikely that the 1,000 plus letters were actually written by the same person. I don't even think the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard were written by the same person. And we could have, a call-in show where people could debate that and discuss that, and they could give their reasons why they think this and that. And they could also make some book recommendations and film recommendations. And Jack the Ripper is a story that I think is indeed the world's most famous unsolved murder mystery, so there's gonna be something that everybody has to say about it. But thank you so much to you guys for the comments, and thank you for listening to Ripper Wednesday. And please look out for some developments with this channel in the future. And I would love to do the call-in show if just we can somehow make it work without trolls and without some type of lagging connection. If not, let's do it. So please stay tuned to Black Box Online Radio. You can always hit the like button and subscribe. Visit some of the links in the description box. And there is always a way to keep in touch at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And that's all for me now. I will see you over on Instagram. And until next time.